Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite early summertime baits that does not get any recognition anymore. They are probably one of the best all-time fish catching tools, but I can tell you this, I talk to a lot of anglers right now that do not even carry them in their tackle box. At one point, it's all everyone threw, and at this point, because they're just not that new, cool, trendy bait anymore, nobody uses them. Nobody even carries them, and you're making a mistake, in my opinion, by not using them. Specifically, what I'm talking about are giant plastic worms, your 12 to 15 inch plastic worms that really, I think, intimidate a lot of anglers because their size is big. And at the same time, like I said, people just don't buy them because they're not talked about that much. But I assure you, your giant plastic worms are still dynamite fish catching tools. So I want to go over some of the worms that I like. I want to go over some of the ways I like to fish them and some of the reasons and places I like to fish them. Before I get into that though, I do want to remind you, if you're looking to support the channel, please use the Tackle Warehouse affiliate link that I provide in the description of the video to do your shopping. Also, if you're looking for a little bit of help on some of your lakes in your area, check out the lake breakdown maps that I do with fishthemoment.com. We provide 40 different waypoints located throughout the lake based on the seasons. It's a really good way to help you get a jump start on one of the lakes that you may be having trouble with. So check that out. That link's in the description as well. And guys, I gotta tell you, if you're looking just to catch fish, don't overlook the giant plastic worm. This is a bait that no matter where you're at in the country, you'll catch fish. I know you look at it and you're like, God, that's a 12-inch worm. You're not going to catch anything that's under 4 pounds on it. The reality is you catch a pile of 12-inch bass that are going after a 12-inch worm. So the fish are not intimidated by this worm at all by its size. It's something that I do think does intimidate anglers because it's a little bit bigger. And at the same time, like I said before, it's just something that isn't talked about in the fishing world, but it should be. So in the summertime, that's when I feel like this bait really starts to shine for a couple of reasons. So the water temperature is really rising. The fish are moving out from their spawning grounds and they're looking to feed. So during the summer months, because the metabolism of the fish is at its highest levels, because the water is at its warmest temperatures, or some of its warmest temperatures, the fish are looking to feed on larger objects. So they're eating bigger bluegill, they're eating gizzard shad, they're eating, in some places, eels and things like that. So the fish are not intimidated by the size. And even though this is a long bait, the reality is they know, based on eating, whether it's night crawlers that come into their lake based on floods, or maybe you're in a place that's got lamprey, maybe you've got a place that's got eel, something like this is actually very easy for the fish to swallow. And in my opinion, they recognize it as a leech or a worm, and they know that that's something that's easy to swallow. There's no, dorsal fins, there's no spines, there's nothing that really prohibits this from balling up and being eaten easily by the fish. Now, do they know that 100%? No, but if they are correlating a big worm to something they've eaten before, like a night crawler, like a leech, like a lamprey, I don't think that they're that concerned with the size of the bait at that point. It's not like there's a lot of mass, like they're trying to eat a 12-inch gizzard shad. And honestly, big bass eat 12-inch gizzard shads. So it's not something that's super overwhelming. But the key here is, in the summer months, the fish are looking for bigger meals because they're burning more energy. They need to eat more. So when you have a larger bait that goes swimming by that presents a relatively easy meal, in my opinion, a lot of those fish are going to go for it. So because of the fact that you're in the summer months, they're looking for bigger meals, but you also start getting some of the other species that I've mentioned that mimic this, that the fish are going to feed on. A lot of times you get those flash floods that wash night crawlers in. They'll start feeding on some of the lampreys and the eels that are out and moving around if you're in some of the lakes that have those. But it's really just a bait that is a very good warm water bait. And I think a lot of it is just because it's a slow presentation and it's hard for the fish to pass up. So there's a handful of worms that I really like to use. The one I'm holding here is, in my opinion, probably the staple when you're talking about big plastic worms or plastic worms in general. This is the Berkeley Power Worm. This is the 12-inch. Generally speaking, most people would say that a plum color or a red bug or any sort of the June bugs or red shad are your primary colors, but you really can switch over to some of the green pumpkins as well in the natural colors. It really doesn't matter that much, but I do think that if you're talking about color, this is one of your standards, which is this is just your plum color. But any sort of shade of this red kind of hue is really, really a primary color that you might be interested in getting. But the power worm is a great worm for it. For me, this is one of the best all-around worms. I really like throwing it on a Carolina rig, and I really like throwing it on a light Texas rig, but I leave the weight unpegged generally if I'm not fishing around a lot of heavy grass or a lot of heavy wood. If I'm fishing through cover, I'll peg the weight, but a lot of times I'll rig this on a 1/4 or 3/8 ounce weight. So it's enough weight to get the bait down, but if I'm leaving it unpegged, that weight will separate and you'll get really good gliding motion out of this bait, which is, again, why I like to throw it on a Carolina rig, because the bait of this size just glides around and it's just a very mesmerizing, tantalizing bait to the fish that they have a hard time passing up. So you don't want to overlook the power worm. Another one that I like to throw, this is the big Jackal Flick Shake, and I think I've heard rumors that this might be getting discontinued. I'm not 100% sure about it, but it's the 9.8 size Flick Shake. It's actually a little bigger than that if you measure it. I think it's more like pushing 11 inches, but it's a big, bulky, straight tail worm. This to me is like your Magnum shaky head bait. So I would throw this on a big shaky head, and at that point, I've got it where it's weighted on the bottom, the tail's up, and it's just kind of a mesmerizing, large, straight tail worm. So I'm going to be dragging this on cover. You can also throw it on like a wobble head and kind of just drag it around, but this is more of a structure worm for me, where I'm fishing a specific target, whether it's a shell bed, a ledge, maybe a brush pile, where I'm just making sure that I'm throwing it in there. But don't overlook a Magnum straight tail worm like this as well. It's not quite 12 inches, but you got to remember, in this case, this is solid mass all the way down. A lot of the big worms, when you're talking about that length, are in the curly tail, so it doesn't have the same presentation as being quite as large. Another one of my all-time favorites, and this one, every time I open a bag of Man's jelly worms, it just brings me right back to like childhood bait shops. Like, there is nothing quite like smelling a bag of Man's jelly worms, and they make a 12-inch. So this is a straight tail 12-inch. This is a strawberry scented one, so it smells phenomenally well. But it's just a big, flat, straight tail worm. Again, this is a really good all-purpose worm. Doesn't produce the same vibration that some of the other ones do that have like your curly tails. It's much more of a gliding style bait. This to me is just another really good bait to throw like on a Carolina rig, but I tend to favor these in clear water. So if I've got water visibility of like 3 feet or better, that's when I like to go with the straight tail jelly worm bait. If I've got water that's not quite as clear, that's when I like to go with something that's got some vibration through the kicker tail. But the Man's jelly worm, the 12-inch Man's jelly worm, is another one of those staple baits. This thing's been around for, I'm going to say 50 years. It may be more than that. But there's a reason it's withstood the test of time. It's because it catches fish. And it's just a killer bait. I mean, it really is. All of these are really good. And the last one I'll talk about too is another one that I was turned on to by a buddy of mine that likes to fish the Kentucky Lake area years ago. And this one is the Net Bait C-Mac. So this is a 15-inch bait, and I'm just undoing the coil on it because it comes all coiled up. So this is another really large curly tail worm. So I'll show you this one compared to the 12-inch. So you can see it's got significantly more length to it. But again, that length is almost all curly tail. Like you can see the mass of the body stops here versus the 12-inch power worm, which has a lot of mass down. So the illusion that the tail creates a lot of time is it's not body mass. It's more of this is what's producing the vibration and drawing the fish to you. So even though it's 15 inches, I would say that this power worm almost creates a bigger illusion of being a larger bait in the water because this tail is always moving and it's real thin and it just doesn't look quite as bulky. In either case, I would use these both in a similar fashion. I would throw it on a Carolina rig or I would throw it on a Texas rig, and I would fish it, you know, anywhere from probably 4 feet of water all the way down to 25 or 30 feet, just depending where the fish are at. But all of these are so good. I love throwing big worms. I'm really surprised that they've been pushed kind of on the side. I mean, there's no reason for it because they are such good fish catching tools. But guys, I hope this was helpful. If you don't have some big worms in your boat, I suggest you get them, you know, that season, depending where you're at in the country, is just starting down south. Up north here, we got a little bit longer before the big worm season starts, but get them now while you can and put them to use. I'm telling you, they still work wonders. They're still absolutely great baits to use. And I'm excited to get out there. Every time I smell a bag of these, it just reminds me of my bait shops when I was a kid. So guys, get yourself some big worms, head out to the lake. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, another video coming out tomorrow.